So I'm chatting to Keith Barnes. Some of you may have seen the news spreading around like relative wildfire on Facebook of his new book, Birds of Greater Southern Africa. Yeah, Keith, thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Doug. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, so I suppose, let's take a step back aside from the book itself. When did you get into, well, not just birding, but I see you're more widely a naturalist, essentially.
Yeah. So I grew up in Roodepoort, actually not very far from Walter Sisulu Botanical Gardens. My dad was a birder, and so we did this first trip to the Drakensberg where I got a lammergeier. And then because I was so close to those mountains, I used to run around and pick up rocks and catch dragonfly larvae and take them home and stuff like that. So from a very young age, I got into it.
Yeah, and study-wise, there are a number of authors who not actually studied in whether it's ornithology or whatever the case may be. What did you study and what led you to where you are now?
I Yeah, it was one of those things. I think from that young age, I just, birds was definitely the core thing that I was interested in, and then there was everything else around it. And then, I'd heard about this place called the Percy Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology, and it's like, if you're interested in birds and want to be a little scientist, where better on Earth to go than there? So that was the goal. And yeah, when I was, I did an undergrad degree at UCT, and then it just progressed from there. Did a conservation biology master's degree, and then got involved in the important bird areas program at the ADU. So my first job was as the IBA guy, sort of coordinator and manager of that project. And then I did the Red Data book back in 2000. And then I decided to go back and study a PhD or apply for a PhD with the FITS. And I worked on larks. I worked on African larks. I worked on taxonomy of African larks. So yeah, that's in a nutshell how it all sort of panned out.
Yeah, taxonomy is a fascinating subject and a long coffee shop argument in itself.
Yeah. No, I think it's kind of funny because as a birder and even in the book to a certain extent, with where birders get very excited about taxonomy, and it's like, well, is it a species or isn't it a species? Is it split or is it lumped? And actually it really doesn't matter. So I kind of look at it as, guys, it doesn't really matter what some authority tells you a bird is or it isn't. Let's just look at the thing, understand it, and understanding all its different varieties and forms and morphs. And is it a juvenile? Is it a female? Is it a this race, that race, the next race? And so I like the idea of getting back to birding. And instead of just having books that tell you, hey, this is how you tell this species from that species. Well, let's understand a little bit more about these things and like delve into, why is the Pollux race of Karoo chat like this, and why is the other one like, not maybe why, but how do you tell those two apart? And which are the sort of parts of the country that you need to be worried about confusing two different taxa from different species, and where do you not need to worry about that? So yeah, that's how I've used my taxonomy background to sort of come into birding or a birding approach and trying to help birders understand variation a bit better.
Yeah, and of course, you're not new to publishing. You've published quite a few books over the years.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff, obviously the Important Bird Areas program and the Red Data book were sort of more scientific-y type publications, conservation documents. But then I got into sort of popular publishing, small books on Kruger National Park, a mammal book, bird book. And actually, so this field guide project was very much, it was something that had been ongoing in the background. But then when COVID happened, I basically am a business person tour operator. And so that sort of shut us down, and that just gave me the time to focus on that book. But I've also been working on another one, which is called Habitats of Africa. And that's to try and help birders and naturalists and ecologists understand the relationship between birds and animals and things in their environment and how they relate to the trees and the environment itself, the habitat itself. So that's going to be quite fun. That should be coming out early next year too. So yeah, COVID kept me busy.
Indeed, and that's definitely something I'm looking forward to add to my library. I mean, the ultimate thing as a bird is when you're out, trying to identify the right habitat when you're looking for something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and it's not necessarily, I mean, I think all of us as local birders, we sort of know, you go out around Joburg, you know what a grassland is, you know what the bush veld is or moist mixed savanna or something like that. But this is also because it's a kind of in a, it does this stuff in a nutshell. What you'll then be able to learn is like, oh my goodness, the hamadas of the Sahara are different from the sand sea of the Sahara. That's different from the reg of the Sahara. So all of a sudden it'll be like, wow, I didn't know there were three different types of discrete desert that comprise the Sahara, stuff like that. So it's like a really nice overview of the entire continent to get folks to sort of appreciate the broad elements of diversity that we have right across the board in Africa.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, when I go up to a popular birding spot, which you may still remember from your South Africa days, is Zachkalestrift, just north of Pretoria. And I mean, in 20 Ks, you've got at least three, possibly more different types of woodland. I mean, it's not just woodland is woodland.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is also sort of done. We didn't want to get too carried away on the botany and stuff like that.
Mm.
So it's, you want another thing that's really cool about the Habitats project is it also feeds into citizen science. You're starting to get a whole lot of people out there gathering data and stuff like that. And if we can somehow give them an appreciation of knowing, oh, wait a minute, I collected this bird list up at Zachkalestrift, but I was in the Kalahari woodland. I was in the sort of thorn savanna. I wasn't in the broadleaf savanna. And we start putting these into various types of citizen science work. And that could be a really cool segue into working out habitat specificity of certain species, et cetera, et cetera. So it has quite a nice goal in terms of its role in citizen science too.
Yeah, and then I mean, on the Southern African region itself, obviously there's a number of books covering that region itself. Your feeling on the need to publish Greater Southern Africa as a region guide?
Okay, so when I was a kid, well, one of the first places I got to explore was Malawi. I hitchhiked up to Malawi from Cape Town, and I worked out I could go up there and go birding and save money rather than staying in Cape Town because I was a real cheapskate, and it was a lot of fun. But the bottom line was that when I got up there, I mean, only 19, when did it come out? Anyway, in the early 90s, eventually, Kenneth Newman published this tiny little volume called Birds of Malawi. And it was essentially just the birds that weren't covered in his other book. But that thing was like a godsend to me because before that, I was seeing birds and I had no idea what they were. And then I'd have to go back to that Fitz library and pour through the old McWirth, Praed and Grant books, these big old gray tomes of text and try and work out what I'd seen. And I just assumed back then that sooner or later somebody would publish a guide including or great field guide for Zambia, Malawi, and places like that. And it just never happened. So when the opportunity came around to include those countries, I thought it was important that I include them. I think that Southern Africans will benefit from knowing what's a little bit north of their borders and also what's a little bit south of their borders. We tend to have this very isolated mindset, and that's cool. I'm not trying to change the listing region or anything like that. That's set in stone. It's exactly what it is. It always will be the most important thing that Southern Africans care about. But there's a bunch of people out there probably sitting on 850 or 860 birds for the region, and they're basically waiting for vagrants to show up, right?
Yeah.
So why not expand your horizons a little bit, jump in your truck and drive up to Zambia and see if you can find a vermiculated fishing owl. I mean, that would be really exciting, right? And so it's for those folks who kind of have reached listing saturation within the region, and maybe just those people who want to explore a bit more widely. Zambia and Malawi are so desperate. I mean, I think Frank Willems, since we published the book, Frank Willems has found 3 new species for Zambia that were excluded from the book. So there you go. I mean, this place is really needs experienced birders, and Southern African birders are really good. If people go up there in any numbers, they will be finding new stuff and birding new zones and adding to the knowledge base that Zambia has. Now, I'm not saying that they can't do that in the traditional Southern African region, but it'd be so much easier to do it in a place like Zambia, which is wild. There's not that much infrastructure, and there's some really, really cool, fun places to go birding.
Yeah, I think that northern corner, I think approaching Congo is apparently one of the hotspots of new species discovery for the region.
They call it Mwinilunga, and it's a tiny little northeast sector of Zambia you see sort of poking up into the DRC. And all along that border region there, and I think Frank's exploring further and further to the east as he goes along. He's finding new cool stuff. And look, I mean, a lot of it's fairly common Congo Basin birds, but olive-bellied sunbird, that's probably a bird that 90% of your viewers have never even heard of. So, or cool things like, like I think the vermiculated fishing owl, which Errol de Beer found back in the late 2010s or 2011 or something like that. I mean, that's a real top draw, seriously enigmatic animal anywhere in the world. So, there's some really, really cool stuff to go and play with up there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, a lot of people don't know what goes into publishing books. I mean, obviously, we all know there's a lot of research and time involved, but I mean, was there any point in the book where you were frustrated or thinking maybe that you'd bitten off more than you could chew or something along those lines?
Look, it was a labor of love. It was a lot of hard work. I knew it was going to be tough. But I also knew what I was setting myself up for. I didn't want to do just another bird book. So that was never in the frame of reference that I was working on. I wanted it to be something special. When I first got that Birds of East Africa book by Terry Stevenson and John Fanshawe, and I saw the illustrations by John Gale and Brian Small, that was when I fell in love with the idea of working with those guys. And so, when you got the buy-in from great artists like that, well, you better deliver on the text. Okay, let's just put it that way. It's like the guys have trusted you, so there was an expectation that I make it as good as I possibly could. And I think we've achieved that. I think it's a beautiful looking book. I think we cover 99%. And what I try to do in the book is, if birds were easy to identify, like bee eaters, I'm not going to waste a lot of text on that. You can look at the pictures. You can pretty much tell most bee eaters apart straight up and down. If there's something important, well then, okay, I'll point it out. But if we're dealing with skuas and jaegers, if we're dealing with lesser black-backed gull, I've dedicated almost a full plate and 22 illustrations to the different versions of lesser black-backed gull. So we've been able to delve into those birds that really, really need the extra space and time. And I mean, even so, just that plate for the lesser black-backed gull, it probably took me days to get that right. Days of work for a single, well, probably more than days, maybe a week or something like that. So no, I never really wanted to give up, but then I also have been through, like publishing the IBA book. I was only sort of 25 or something like that when we did that. I think they are a bit of more than I could chew, because I didn't need to go into the minutiae of every single one of these regions, and I tried to. So I had experience in publishing big, fairly significant tomes before. So I think I was well aware of what I was signing up for.
Awesome. And your habitats book, I mean, any idea when you think that'll land? When can people be anticipating around?
We're hoping early next year. And look, the one thing that was great about the field guide was that Bloomsbury, who were the primary commissioners of the work in the United Kingdom, obviously did a deal to get it published in South Africa. What South Africans and Southern Africans probably don't know is that book sells for $46 in the United States, and it sells for £30 in the UK. At the moment, it's selling on Bird for 299 Rand. I mean, that's a pretty amazing deal. And South Africans often, we have a tendency to moan a little bit that we can't sort of meet the prices that the international market demands for certain things. Well, you're getting a good deal there. So So take advantage of it while it lasts, because I don't know how long it's going to last. But the Habitats book is with Princeton University Press. I'm not sure if they're going to do a similar deal. So I don't even know if the book's going to be sold in South Africa or if it's going to be a strictly US based thing. If it is a US based thing, then yeah, the price is probably going to be not what South Africans really want to pay for a book like that. But let's see. I'll try and prevail on them to try and do something similar to what Bloomsbury did, and see if we can get it into the South African market at a reasonable price, because I think people will really like it, because it really is a different way of viewing the environment, birds, birding, and just yeah, being out in the bush.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see from the extensive bookshelf behind you, you can never have enough bird books.
No, you can't. And I mean, I think you've had this discussion with folks about apps and our books dying and what have you. And it's interesting because I still think that, and maybe it's a generational thing. I'm not sure what folks who are under 25 or 30 think about books, but certainly those of us a little bit older than that, we love books and we love the way they feel. And I mean, uh, books can be big, and you may not necessarily want to carry them in your backpack every time you go for a walk. But leaving a book in your car while you go for a walk, and you pick up your app and you try and identify what you're looking at while you're walking. But you can always go back and refer to the book in the car, refer to the book back at home, or something like that. So I think the supposed death of books is over exaggerated. And there's always space for a good book if it's good enough. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I saw a somewhat philosophical debate many years ago on how do they improve the tactility of electronic devices that's missing with books and paper.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, eh? Because I mean, we all are still addicted to these devices, and people start panicking, having panic attacks the second they can't find their phone.
Mm.
So clearly it fills a role in our lives that wasn't there before with anything. Um, but by the same token, I think the first thing I do when I'm thinking about going birding somewhere is I don't go online on my phone and try and scroll through pictures of things. I go to my shelf, I pick up a bird book and I sit down and I grab a coffee and I send a page through something. Um, I don't know if everybody does that, but it's certainly what I do.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, books are far more engaging, and I mean, you can get lost in them for far longer than you can in an app.
Right. Yeah, apps are very, very good in terms of like, I've got this problem, like I've seen this animal and now I want to work out what it is. And then you go to that to get that answer that you're looking for. But yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about, the sort of experience of sitting and vicariously enjoying either the birds or the animals of an area is done with a book in your hands and, at leisure, let's say, rather than with the immediacy of needing to go and solve a problem.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I must say, awesome book. I'm really pleased to have it in my library too, and all the best. I hope it sells really, really well. And yeah, thanks for your time and thanks for the chat.
Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, good luck with your projects too.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith.
Okay, cheers,
Cheers.
man. Bye-bye.